Today I want to talk about art and visual media as a mode of communication. About 90% of what we learn through visual means. So whether you're an artist or whether you're just interested in interpreting this visual language in terms of looking at other work or just for the sake of understanding visual language, I think you'll find our video interesting. But I like to think of visual language as a kind of a code where the building blocks of that code are the elements of visual form themselves. Elements like line and shape and texture and pattern, how to create depth in your work, value, color, aspects of color, composition, and of course hand-eye coordination is really huge in learning to be able to manipulate elements within visual form, but also understanding the concept of how a lot of those elements work. For instance, how do you create depth on a two-dimensional field? How does your eye process color? So these are things that when you're just learning a new medium, of course you need to spend a great deal of time working at so that you can learn how to put them together so that you can be able to articulate them most effectively and express your voice as an artist. When I was in art school, I spent the majority of my time working on these formal elements, these foundations, so that I could learn not just which elements I wanted to be able to use, but which elements did not apply to what it is that I had to say, when it came to my content, how they operate. And so once you understand how those operate and you're well versed at using them, then you're much better prepared to be able to voice what it is you're trying to express as an artist. And that falls into your concept, what it is that you have to say as an artist. And then, of course, how do you say it? How do you impress your viewer with what it is that you have to say in a way that really makes an impact? And for that, you need to impress them on an emotional level, right? So Aristotle said that in order for you to be able to communicate effectively, your communication has to contain these three elements. Number one, you have to be able to impress on your viewer, in our case, that you're an expert technically. And that relies on whether or not you have become well versed in these foundational elements. Not just how well you can manipulate them, but also how thoughtful you have been about which elements you have decided to use and how you are using them, right? And then the other element, another second aspect of the triangle is, well, how logical is your argument? What is it you're trying to say, and does it make sense to your viewer? And the third element of the triangle is the pathos, which is how are you going to affect your viewer emotionally? Because Aristotle said, if you can't affect them, impress them emotionally, then you're not going to have a lasting impression on your viewer, in our case. So how do you combine those elements then of visual form, elements that have to do with line and shape and texture, as we mentioned, in a way where you have been thoughtful and well versed in using them in your concept, and how logical is your concept to your viewer, and how are you expressing it to them in your work in an emotional way? How are you making an impact on them emotionally? And I would say, with regard to this area of emotion, that's the area that I think in this visual language, in terms of art, gets neglected the most. And part of that is, I think, due to the fact that in the last several decades, we've kind of gotten away from valuing this emotional context as this emotional component, because a lot of people have been looking for work that's easy to live around. But there are other ways to make emotional connections with associations of particular form, for example. It's important to note that historically, how humans process abstract shape and form has been thought of as being somewhat subjective, and therefore how they were combined and interpreted has been somewhat subjective. The abstract expressionists as a group did a lot of work on this, working mainly out of their gut emotion and making these associations, or trying to do research with how people viewed their work and what they saw in the work, and whether there were patterns in that interpretation. Rorschach, for example, the psychologist who began researching in the 1920s with the ink blots, and he was interested in which types of personality disorders would see specific forms or shapes in these abstract forms. But today, many decades later, we have developing fields of neuroscience and neuroaesthetics where they're beginning to understand not just generalizations or particular groups with forms, but specifically how the brain processes visual elements, and at which point during that processing people begin to try to make association, and at which point memory comes into play. So these are developing sciences and fairly new, but they're learning rapidly how we process form and moving, therefore, our understanding about how people process abstract form away from the subjective understanding more towards a scientific understanding. It's important for us to keep up on and read about that research, because not just can it make our own associations with these abstract elements as we're in our exploratory process in our studio more meaningful, but also help us be more able to predict how the viewers of our work are going to be interpreting our works. So now, I'm not saying that we want to be more deliberate. You can certainly be more vague or more obscure with how you express what it is you're to express, but at least be informed about what those choices are if you're going to be using that sliding scale, for example, about how deliberate you want to be or how obscure, for instance, you want to be. We've all had the experience, for instance, of reading an artist's statement and then comparing it to the work and thinking, well, the statement's nice and the work is nice, but I don't think they particularly job. I do think as artists we want to be well versed in understanding what these elements of this code, this visual language are. Again, I'm not saying that as an artist your messaging, what it is you're trying to express to your viewer, should lack mystery, or that it should be overt, or if you're a political painter should be lean more towards clear propaganda. I'm not saying that. I am saying, though, that you should be able to understand the differences in how you want to use that sliding scale, how overt you want to be, how obscure you want to be, so that you're in control of what it is that you want to express. And foundational to that, key to understanding that, is understanding what these elements of effective communication are, and then of course understanding these elements of visual form. So anyway, I hope you liked our video, and thanks so much for watching.